This is Still Enrolled.
Welcome on into Still Enrolled, a Big Ten football podcast. As always, Ryan Hickey, Brian Tripp with you here. It's crazy, Tripp. We're in week 13. We have 2 weekends left of the regular season before we finally get down to the nitty-gritty. I can't believe it. It's been a really fun season so far. Crazy that we're now almost there. Penultimate regular season week. We got some big games, obviously highlighted by Indiana, Ohio State. We'll break that down. We'll also break down every other week 13 matchup as well. So much to get into here, Tripp. How are we doing, man?
I'm doing great. And it doesn't feel like we're close to the end of college football season, since it's going to go until January 20th this year with the national championship game and with 4 of the 5 teams in the top 5 Big Ten teams in the college football playoff rankings again this week. Have a feeling we'll have a lot of Big Ten football to chat about here over the next couple of months still. Hard to believe. College football has really, really changed.
You are right. 2 months, like it's November 21st when we record this. It's essentially the season ends 2 months from today. And like you said, we expect Big Ten teams to be playing long into the postseason. So you are right. It's weird that it's gone fast, but also like we're in a way almost halfway through-ish. It's still a long way to go, but an exciting time too, with so many big games here to go as well, including, I guess we'll start here, Tripp, because we did have some news in between the last time we recorded on Monday. And that was the fact that we were both debating, is Oregon in the Big Ten championship? Are they not?
Yeah.
I saw one thing that said they are, but we saw nothing from the Big Ten that said they actually were in. And Tripp, we finally got some news that at least we know one participant in Indy here coming in a few weeks.
You know, your tie-breaking procedures are complex and convoluted if the conference takes until Tuesday, the Tuesday following the weekend games, to announce that Oregon has officially clinched a spot in the Big Ten championship game. So they haven't clinched the number 1 seed. They'll be either the number 1 or number 2 seed. But you're right. As we talked on the podcast on Monday, we actually had to pause the recording because you said Oregon has clinched. I said, I don't think they have yet, because there's so many different tie-breaking scenarios. If everyone ends at 8-1, or if a couple of teams end 8-1 and a couple at 7-2, I don't think they had officially clinched. Well, the Big Ten ran all the numbers, ran all the scenarios, and Oregon has at least clinched a berth in the Big Ten championship game. And barring a major upset, we will know their opponent based on the result of Indiana, Ohio State this weekend. Obviously, the game that's going to dictate a lot of our podcast today. There are a couple of other scenarios. Do you want me to give those too?
Sure. Let's get nuts. Let's get crazy. Why not?
Yeah. So Indiana's in the title game if both Indiana and Oregon are obviously 9-0, and that would mean a Hoosier win this weekend. Indiana's also in if they beat Ohio State, and even if they lose to Purdue, they still would make it, having the tiebreaker over Penn State in that scenario. Ohio State makes it to the Big Ten championship game if they defeat Indiana and Michigan. Pretty straightforward. Okay. If Oregon, Ohio State, and Penn State are all 8-1, and Indiana finishes 7-2. Now, that's pretty unlikely, since the Hoosiers are going to host Purdue the last week of the regular season. So keep that all in mind. Ohio State, I think there's an outside chance. Like, sure, you could see in some fathomable way that Ohio State falls to Michigan. Big rivalry game. No one really, this is it for Indiana. If they win this week, they're going to run the table. And for Ohio State, they could also get in with a win against Indiana and a Penn State loss to Minnesota or Maryland. And then it doesn't matter if Ohio State, whatever happens the rest of the way. And if all teams finish 8-1 in the Big Ten, Ohio State, even explaining it is hard and complicated. Ohio State, if all teams finish 8-1 in the Big Ten, they will qualify. Wait, that's a win versus Indiana. Ohio State would then also have to beat Michigan, and then a Penn State loss to Minnesota or Maryland puts them in. So there's one team that's still, Penn State still has one scenario. There's only one scenario. So if any Nittany Lion fans are listening, the one scenario where it would be Indiana or Penn State is if Oregon finishes 9-0, Indiana and Penn State are both 8-1, and Ohio State is 7-2. Then it would go to the tiebreaker of strength of opponents' record. So whichever team's conference opponents have the, I can see you scratching your head. But that's how they get in. But whoever wins this week pretty much is in the driver's seat.
I would agree, to keep it simple. But this also highlights the Big Ten and also the SEC. They're too damn big. Like the fact that like it took until Tuesday to realize, oh, geez, I guess Oregon, no matter how it breaks out, is in. When you have 18 teams and you're only playing half the conference, like it's so like convoluted is the perfect word. We're sitting here doing all this math, and if they win here, but they lose there, and all of a sudden, who is the tiebreaker? Well, we need Minnesota to win so we can up our strength of schedule and lower. It is at. I will say again, the old Big Ten, right? East versus West, it was flawed. It had its flaws. I'm not saying I want to go back to those days, but I did appreciate the simplicity of basically you're playing everyone in your division, and basically the best record is going to the Big Ten title game. And a lot of the tiebreakers we never talked about tiebreakers for the most part. Oh, that's the new world to live in, Tripp here. A lot of math.
I think you really know it. And as the college football playoff rankings come out this week, right? Oregon's number 1, Ohio State's number 2, Penn State's 4, Indiana's 5. And there's so much consternation right now. Another big word, which I'm really proud of here as I turn today.
You know, I was not sure if you were going to mention it or not.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't sure because I was planning on mentioning at some point today that is your birthday. Happy birthday!
I have built out my vocabulary, so I've expanded my vocabulary over the years. But I will note this: it is a lot harder getting out of bed at 36 than it was 20. I don't feel older. I hope I don't look a ton older. Like I've been bald since 24. So what's the difference? But I do notice, man, you get tired a whole heck of a lot faster at 35, 36 than you do in your 20s. The recovery's longer too.
Are you at least wiser with age?
I would like to think so. So the playoff rankings: Oregon 1, Ohio State 2, Texas.
That's
3.
it. We're not going to talk birthday plans. You're just going to blow right by it, mention your birthday, get some pity birthday wishes from listeners, and we're just going to move on.
How old are you now?
30.
It feels like just yesterday you were interning for me on the Keystone Sports Beat.
Never forget when I was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and now I'm with you. Once you hit 30, you're over the hill.
You were an exceptional intern too, and we had a good program. It was me, it was Matt Mayer, right? You were in the Matt era. It was Dan Vizilla, yourself, and Cody Enos, who listens. Right. He listens to this podcast.
Shout out Cody.
Shout out Cody. And we were at a TV studio that they converted one of the old programming rooms into a flawed radio studio for it. The room was really, really big, which worked in some ways, but in others it didn't. And we were syndicated out on 3 stations in central Pennsylvania to talk local regional sports. And it was a good show. We had a variety of opinions, a lot of great guests. We had some guests in person from Penn State, and it felt like, I think we kind of modeled it after the Dan Patrick show, where everyone had, that I was kind of the host, but everyone had a voice, and we had a good time with it. Like it was a good show. The only problem was ownership forgot to write the checks to the host. So
would you say forgot, or maybe just knew what they were doing the whole time and said, oh shoot, he finally got the jig is up, we're out of here, guys.
After 2.5, 3 months of, hey, where's my pay? It was, I'm not showing up to do another show until I get paid. and that was kind of the end of that. Welcome to the world of radio. What a true internship experience. You learn about the business. You get on-air reps and really learn about the business.
You're not wrong. Quick question: If we were like the Dan Patrick show, they obviously have the Danettes. What would that make Cody and I? The Trippers, the Bryanettes.
When I was working full time at Penn State last year, one of my friends named my
Trippsters?
Intern team the Little Trippies.
I don't hate it. There's a lot of different ways you can go on that. I think that's one of the better ones you could have.
Mm-hmm. They named.
I'm honored to be a little trippy.
So when I was with a team traveling, and they would go to events, there was always a picture that was sent to me of my students Kendall and Destiny and Kaylee, Tyler, and it was, here are the Little Trippies. Oh, we're so proud of the Little Trippies. Oh, look at Haley today. They're doing so great. And I'm like, they're great. They were great. We had awesome interns at Penn State.
This is how I know you're getting old, by the way. Now you're starting to reflect already, look back on the good old days, dish out compliments that are not deserved. Man, 36, you're going to like 72.
Can I get back to the college football playoff now? To
Sure.
use some of my wisdom, how wise I am. I really do have something important to share with our audience. So, Texas 3, Notre Dame 6, Alabama 7, Miami 8, Ole Miss 9, Georgia 10, Tennessee 11, Boise State 12. The rankings this week, everyone knows about them by now. But for me, when you talk about, and believe me, I might be getting older, but I still remember what we were talking about 5 minutes ago. When you talk about mega conferences and an 18-team conference, that schedule disparity, like the whole discussion still is, and I don't want to rehash this again because you're certainly getting all the noise from every major media outlet covering college football. It drives their clicks, their listens, their views. It Tuesday, Wednesday, early Thursday, it is a great debate topic that is going to elicit a strong reaction from some fan base, a fan base of a team or a conference out there. Like, believe me, there's a method to the madness that's going on here. And this is great. The debate is great for college football to try to get eyeballs on college football. It is a good thing. But the schedule disparity really impacts a team's potential odds at qualifying for the playoff. And the Big Ten is playing 9 conference games. Meanwhile, the SEC is playing 8 conference games. And if you want to split hairs as to who's the best 1-loss SEC team or who's the best 2-loss SEC team, think of it big picture. If Georgia's not playing UMass this week, but is playing another SEC team, if every team in the SEC is playing another SEC opponent for one additional game, that means half of the league has another loss at the end of the year. That is how you sort it out. Play a 9-game conference schedule. Every conference should be in alignment on a 9-game conference schedule. Half the league would have another loss. And I agree. I think the SEC deserves 4 or 5 teams in the playoff, same as the Big Ten. But you can't have, when you're going to have scheduling disparities because teams are only playing certain teams in their league, like there's no doubt Georgia's schedule is way, way tougher than Texas's. And Georgia deserves to be in the college football playoff with the losses they have. Their only losses are at Alabama and at Ole Miss. 2 top 10 teams. They have signature wins. Like, I don't get why they're really the debate. The debate is more Ole Miss, right? Lost at home to a 3-win Kentucky team, on the road to a 6-4 LSU team. Miami, different conference. They don't have a quality win on their schedule. They have tons of close games. You know, Notre Dame has the worst loss among a top 10 team, and they've played some decent teams, but no great teams this season. Texas, their best wins are Michigan, Vanderbilt, and they were dominated by Georgia. To me, it's the strength of an opponent's schedule now. A team's schedule is going to be so variable, and there's going to be so much inconsistency from team to team in your league. One way to solve it is to play 9 games in the SEC.
I agree with that. I hope it happens at some point. I think that's like, it's ridiculous that we're in a world of college football where each conference plays different amount of conference games. ACC and SEC play 8, Big 12 and Big 10 play 9. Why it's not even, it makes no sense to me. But also, like, this is a problem that's going to last for like a while now. Again, when you have an 18-team Big 10, a 16-team SEC, even if you have a 9-game schedule, at best you're playing half the league. And so you're going to, like, Georgia's the perfect example. Last year, they had the easiest schedule in the SEC. They breezed right through. This year, they have the most difficult. Indiana, I bet you, right? They have the easiest schedule this year in the Big Ten. I bet you that's going to change next year. Like, I don't know that I have to look at the schedule offhand, but like, you know, we'll see some surprise teams as well if they pop up. But like, it's going to change every year. And each team, there's going to be one team in each conference that has an easy schedule. And wow, they missed a lot of the best teams. And the other way, it's going to be, wow, they got every hard team in their schedule. It's going to be like this for a long time.
And, it's hard. It's a cyclical sport. And I think there's more parity now. And we've discussed that than ever.
Right.
So if you look at your schedule going into the year in the Big Ten and Indiana's on it, you're like, well, that's a check that one off. If you're one of the top teams, that's an easy win. But to your point, I was looking at this, obviously working on the Penn State broadcast team, and there's been some debate about Penn State's strengths of schedule, quality wins, and so forth this year. This is who Penn State plays next season. Big Ten home games: Oregon, Indiana, Nebraska, Northwestern. Oregon, Indiana. Big Ten away games: at Ohio State, at Iowa, at Michigan State, at UCLA, at Rutgers. I mean, compare that schedule, looking at it through the 2024 lens, to the schedule Penn State played this year. There's so much variability from year to year, to your point, when you have these mega conferences. But I thought the most interesting thing I heard this week, you have the Big Ten kind of going after the SEC and the SEC fans going after the Big Ten, media members, everything. No one is debating that those are the best two conferences with the best teams in college football. And I think Penn State head coach James Franklin had something really interesting to say about this. And his perspective is interesting, having coached at Vanderbilt and at Penn State.
Obviously, I'm concerned about Penn State, and obviously I'm concerned about the Big Ten. But I'm one of the few guys that have been a head coach in both conferences. And to me, the right thing to be talking about is the two best conferences in all of college football is the Big Ten and the SEC. And we should have the most teams in. I don't think there's any question to that. I think where it becomes problematic is when you have rules for certain teams and certain conferences to get in, and maybe people don't feel like they're actually in the top 12. So I get it. We're fortunate. We're part of the two conferences that I think everybody would agree are the two strongest conferences. I don't think we need to take shots in the Big Ten at the SEC, because that's been proven over time. And I don't think the SEC should be taking shots at the Big Ten. The reality is, whether people's feelings are hurt or not, these two conferences need to have, the biggest number and the biggest presence in the playoffs, because we've earned it throughout the season.
A fresh take, right? I mean, that's just not the constant debate that we've heard. It's a great perspective, and I think a reset for everyone who's having these discussions day in and day out, where you're comparing Texas, Georgia, Penn State, Indiana. These are the best two conferences. They have the most power in college football, and that's a very high-level perspective that you would expect a coach whose voice has a seat at the table to offer, because ultimately this is going to come down to the Big Ten and the SEC are going to drive this playoff thing. They're going to get 4 automatic bids into a 12, 16-team playoff, whatever it is. Whether you like it or not, that's the way it's going. And I think it's interesting to hear a coach's perspective on that.
I hate the automatic, I hate that. You're probably right. Yeah. That's where I hate that. To me, that's the only thing where it just gives me the ick, just because now it takes you earn it on the field. And I don't, just because you're the 4th best Big Ten team, in some years they may be, 8-4.
Yeah.
That's not good enough. But I think that's ridiculous. But beyond that, I think Franklin is right. And I think it's what is nice and refreshing is the fact that in a 12-team playoff, we are now debating the 4th Big Ten team and the 4th, 5th, and 6th SEC team, right, as get a playoff spot. Imagine, Tripp, we had this year the 14 playoff, where you're looking just in the Big Ten, Oregon, Ohio State, Indiana. 1, probably 2 of those teams out, not competing for a championship, and they could be 11, 2 of them could be 11-1 and the other 12-0. It's so at least now when we're talking about teams who should be in, who should be out, it is teams on the fringe, teams that are most likely not going to win a national title or make a deep run, but at least we're talking about now the 5th best, SEC team or 4th best Big Ten team. At least we're not talking about the top of just is Ohio State getting screwed? Their only loss of the year is, on the road to the number 1 team in the country. They beat Indiana, let's just say, and all of a sudden they're still maybe on the outside looking in. At least that's not the discussion and the debate. So at least college football got it right in expanding.
Yep.
Because now at least whatever the deserving teams are for sure in. There's no situation which a team that could win a national title is going to be outside looking in.
Yep.
The way we have seen in previous years in a 14 playoff where you could argue maybe some of the best teams don't make it.
And I think that as we get more clarity onto what the field is, that's always the perspective to take. When you had a 4-team playoff, and granted, there were some years where it was pretty clear cut who the number 1, number 2, number 3 teams were. But last year, the case of Florida State, they deserved an opportunity to play for a national title because of the year they had, and let it play out on the field. You know, it's like all these hypotheticals right now. Well, Georgia would beat 5 of the top 7 teams. Well, maybe, and maybe we'll have a chance to find out, but you also have to beat who's on your schedule to earn that opportunity. But with a 12-team playoff, you can afford to lose a game, but will teams 13, 14, 15, 16, do you actually look at them as true national title contenders? And there's more parity than ever this year, right? We look at the field, and you could say a team that's ranked 10th, 11th right now. Yeah, you view them as maybe a team to win a national championship. But when the playoff rankings are finally officially revealed and the field is set, if your team is on the outside looking in, or a team is on the outside looking in, the only way you can legitimately criticize the new formula, the new method, the new expanded playoff is, do you feel like Team 13 had a chance to win the national championship or deserved an opportunity based on the season they've had to win a national championship? And more often than not, in fact, I'll go 99% of the time, the answer is going to be no. In a typical season, in the old way of college football, yeah, they may have had a tough schedule. It may be a little unbalanced, but no Georgia fan would sit at home right now and go, we deserve to be in the national championship game. No, you lost twice. Like, you lost twice. So you don't. You don't. But that's the beauty of the new format. And they feel like they have a national championship caliber team. You know, in past years, no Notre Dame fan would say, oh, we deserve a shot at the national championship. No, you don't. You lost to NIU. No, you don't. But at least this year, their quality of team will have that opportunity to play it out in the playoffs. Does that make sense?
No, it does. It does. Yeah. And obviously, one of the teams that's centered around this entire debate of Big Ten versus SEC versus everybody else, right, is Indiana. They come in at 10-0. Everyone wants to point at the strength of schedule and who they've played. And now this is their chance. Go into the Horseshoe on Saturday, Tripp, to play Ohio State. I want to ask you this question first here before we dive into the game really fast. When you look at the stakes and the conversation around Indiana, would you say right now going to this game, it's the biggest game of the Big Ten conference schedule this year? We've had Ohio State, Oregon. We've had Ohio State, Penn State. Obviously now the Buckeyes, Indiana. Like, this is now the third top 5 matchup in the conference so far this season. Would you look at this game as being, the biggest so far in the conference?
That's such a tough question because the other games also had such a big impact on the conference's perception and the race for a Big Ten crown, if that means anything, if the number 1 seed means anything anymore, which I don't know. We can have a whole nother debate, and we probably will on an upcoming podcast about the value and worth of conference championship games. And are they still even worthwhile to hold? Certainly there's a lot of TV money and money invested in those. It's another big ratings. You got another big matchup. I'm going to say yes, though, because a good performance by Indiana, all but barring a huge upset from Minnesota or from Maryland against Penn State, a good performance by Indiana essentially guarantees the Big Ten is having 4 teams in this playoff. Now, I'm of the opinion that no matter what happens, Indiana should be in. But I think Indiana, you look at strength of schedule, I get it. They still have something to prove to a lot of the country. And if you look at overall perception of the Big Ten, having 3 elite teams versus 4, Indiana's this national Cinderella, this darling media story. I think the stakes for them and what it could mean for the conference of getting 3 or 4 teams in, Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State, we talked about from the first podcast we did, that those are all teams that are playoff contenders, if not national championship contenders. But if the Big Ten can get a fourth team in, big for the conference. And not only get a fourth team in, maybe have 2 or 3 teams hosting in that top 8 in that first round. Yeah, this is as significant a game as there is this season for the conference.
I agree. And honestly, it's a large part of what you just said. It is like, as stupid as it is a big narrative building game. If Indiana is competitive, if they win and go in the shoe, you shut up 95% of the country that wants to bash you and kick you out if you lose. Even by 1 point, they're ready to just throw you out and drop you to like 17. So you could shut everybody up. Can
I make one point really quick?
Sure.
We're hearing all this talk and yapping from wherever.
A lot of yapping.
The committee ultimately holds the cards. And there may be this narrative from Joey Galloway and Booger McFarland and Josh Pade and Heather Dinich and Nicole Auerbach. Like, everyone has their opinions. Ultimately, the only opinion that matters is the committee. The committee has 4 of the top 5 teams right now, Big Ten teams. So that tells you what the committee thinks of the Big Ten. So I don't see the committee knocking Indiana out just because they lose, no matter what the margin is, unless it's like really, really, really ugly, which I don't think it's going to be. The committee clearly thinks the Big Ten is good. That is why they have Oregon 1, Ohio State 2, Penn State 4, and Indiana 5. So no matter what all that external noises and chatter, and you'll have networks trying to drive narratives and trying to get teams into the college football playoff, it doesn't matter. Ultimately, the committee has spoken. 4 of the top 5 teams are from the Big Ten. That's whose opinion matters. And I don't think anyone's talked about that. That is what matters, and that's what the committee thinks of the Big Ten to this point.
It is, though, frustrating that nationally it feels like everyone's banging on. You're right. It doesn't matter what ESPN, Fox, it doesn't matter what anybody says outside of the 13 people in that room. But it is beyond maddening just to see everyone knocking Indiana, not because of what they did, not even because of who they played. It's really the logo. Again, Texas has played nobody. Nobody's saying boo. It's all, even Penn State, some people are knocking, but not as much as Indiana. It's all about the logo on the helmet because they've never been a traditional football power, so they can't be going. They got to suck. They play nobody. Let's just get them out of here. Lose and just throw them out. It's been a fun story, but see you later. Now it's time for the big boys to play. They can shut everybody up, but also what you said as well. Like, you want to talk about, again, perception. SEC almighty. We deserve 10 teams in the playoff every single year. Well, if Indiana wins or even loses like a 3-point game at the buzzer, I think there's a good chance you are seeing probably 2, bare minimum 2, a good chance 3 Big Ten teams host playoff games. And again, if you have to have those SEC teams come north and play in some cold, raucous conditions, and if you're the Big Ten, you win 2 out of those 3 playoff games, you win all 3, that narrative all of a sudden changes, and the Big Ten, fair or not, because I think they are a very good conference. I think they're equal with the SEC this year. I think the SEC just has better PR. I think you change that narrative.
Yep. I think it's unfair, no matter how the postseason goes, Big Ten, SEC, if one dominates it and one does, it's unfair then to go, well, that's the superior, just based on the results of 3 or 4 games in the postseason. I get it. And I think each year should have its own. I think every team, every conference should have a clean slate to start the year, but you just know there's going to be long-term implications coming out of this. But yeah, biggest game of the year. But Ohio State, some bad news this week going into the biggest game of the year.
Yeah.
And I think a headline kind of came out of nowhere. Center Seth McLaughlin, we've talked about Ohio State's offensive line struggles this year and the way they've had to piece it together, trying to get this puzzle to be right. Seth McLaughlin, who's kind of been the mainstay stalwart on that line, their leader up front, suffered an Achilles tear in practice on Tuesday. Obviously going to miss the rest of the season. Josh Simmons, the left tackle, also out for the season. Remember, Carson Hinsman was Ohio State's center last year. They put him in at left guard when they slid Donovan Jackson out to left tackle, and it's worked pretty well. Like they held up against Penn State. They've performed well the last couple of weeks, but now, do you put Hinsman back at center? What do you do with Jackson? Do you keep him out at tackle? Probably yes. Joshua Padilla is kind of this other guy who doesn't have many reps. He's been the backup center. Does he slide in for McLaughlin? And the timeline of it going into your biggest game of the year against a team with a really good defensive front certainly certainly huge news out of Columbus this week. And the biggest story outside of the impact of the result of the game on the playoffs, the biggest story going into this game is that.
You're 100% right. And the last time we saw an Ohio State offensive line injury, like you said, when Josh Simmons got hurt against Oregon, that next game was against Nebraska, and they looked out of whack and out of sorts. And that offensive line got dominated by what was at the time a really good Nebraska run defense. You saw Ohio State running that game for just 64 yards, 2.1 yards per carry, Tripp. And now, not only now do you have another offensive line injury, and it looks like the left side of your line is going to either be all backups or guys playing out of position. Not great. Well, here comes to town the number one rush defense in all of college football. The Hoosiers do a great job allowing just 72 yards on the ground. Tripp, this feels like Nebraska 2.0 if you're an Ohio State fan. This is, you talk about an impactful injury. Josh Simmons, obviously, like he was their best lineman, I think you'd say, this season. Losing, though, your center, now down two guys. This, sound the alarm bells, man. Again, we saw against Nebraska. Doesn't matter how much skill talent you have. Doesn't matter how great the defense is. If you can't win the line of scrimmage, they got lucky to beat the Cornhuskers. And there's way more talent coming to town in Indiana than Nebraska had at the time when they played at the Shoe a few weeks ago. This is a dangerous, dangerous spot here for Ohio State.
And McLaughlin's the leader of that unit up front. Mikhail Kamara, right, leads the Big Ten with 9.5 sacks. The Indiana defensive line is averaging, according to Pro Football Focus, over the last 3 games, nearly 18 quarterback pressures per game. So not only are they stout against the run, they are able to get pressure on the quarterback. And now more is going to fall on the shoulders of Will Howard in this game for Ohio State. And this may be a game, I don't mean this as a criticism, because Howard's made some really big plays in big spots this year. But he has so many weapons at his disposal. 3 receivers, 2 great backs. There may come a time in this game that Will Howard, with his legs, the way he did in Happy Valley, or with his arm, he may have to make a play or two for Ohio State to win. Not just rely on everyone else to make a play. And look, he's at the reins of this thing. So he's had an impact on the season. He's been as efficient as any quarterback in the country this year. But he may really need to put a little bit more on his back to have success against what is a really good Indiana defense. And we didn't even talk about Farrell and Pons, who have combined 6 interceptions, but obviously the toughest matchup by far for them this season.
You're right. And also, too, I think this puts pressure not only on Will Howard, but I think Chip Kelly as well and Ryan Day.
Yeah.
I thought they did a really good job game planning when they played Penn State, with their offensive line issues coming off the Nebraska game. But now, again, like you said, losing your veteran leader, so much experience, the guy that got the entire line set and organized. And now facing that run defense, you have to assume that if you're Ohio State, you're going to be one-dimensional. And so now you have to find different ways to be able to, quote-unquote, run the football, whether that's wide receiver screens, running back screens, tight end screens, more zone reads, get Will Howard on the edge. Like, you have to be – if you're Chip Kelly, this has to be the most creative game plan you've had so far to date because you have to anticipate we're not going to be able to run the ball. We can't line up and just pound the ball down their throat and have our talent take over because Indiana showed you against every team they've played, that won't work. That won't work. And so you have all this talent at your disposal. We've seen at times, when we had Joshua Perry on a few weeks ago, Tripp, I thought he did a tremendous job breaking down why Ohio State struggled against Nebraska. And in part, he said the game planning and the play calling was too vanilla. Kind of too, hey, we got the best players. We're going to line up and beat you. You're not if you try to say we're going to line up and beat Indiana, Tripp, this is maybe the first time we'll ever said this in this rivalry. You're not doing it. You're not doing it in this game. If you just say we got the better players, we're going to line up. We're just going to play ball. Chip Kelly, there's a lot of pressure on him, I think, in this game here to figure out an offense that can work.
Will Howard said the key to that Indiana defense, and a guy, if you're watching the game, Aiden Fisher, linebacker for Indiana, he is a guy. He's good. He is a guy to watch in this game. All right. Anything else to add on Ohio State's offense versus the Indiana defense?
No, but I'd like to go on the other side of the ball if that's okay.
Yeah, let's do it.
Because I think you look at Ohio State's defense, right? They get a lot of praise. And I think rightfully so. They have everyone back. They got Caleb Downs. Like, they have a really good defense. But we did see in the biggest game of the year so far against Oregon, they got shredded in the air. Denzel Burke, obviously, we saw him especially get toasted by these Oregon wide receivers.
Mhm.
And so when you look at Dylan Gabriel, he threw for 341 passing yards, did not have a turnover at all. So he was able to have a lot of success, high completion percentage as well. You look at Curtis Rourke and this passing offense for Indiana, they run a very efficient system as well. They don't turn it over. He has 21 touchdowns, just 4 interceptions. And you look at Indiana, not only are they efficient, but like Oregon, they have a lot of explosive pass plays as well. You look at their 2 receivers, Omar Cooper Jr., Elijah Surratt. They lead the Big Ten in terms of yards per reception. Cooper, 22 yards per reception. Surratt, 18 yards per reception. So like Oregon, they're efficient, but they don't turn the ball over, but they also can beat you down the field as well. And if you're Ohio State, you saw that as a big weak point against Oregon. That's one to keep an eye on here as well. Because I think despite, you look at all the rankings and Ohio State's defense is at or near the top and they played well against Penn State, keep them out of the end zone, or at least the offense out of the end zone. I think they're for a real challenge here. I think Indiana's offense can move the ball and had a lot of success.
However, I don't think Indiana has faced a pass rush like Ohio State has all year. I think Ohio State's been good against the run. Indiana has been balanced. So you might mention all that with the passing game. Ohio State, with the big guys in the middle and their DNs, I think they're going to be able to slow down Indiana's run game. And if they force them to pass, and you're talking about that Indiana pass game, Jack Sawyer and JTT, Indiana's not faced anything near that level of getting after the quarterback. And Rourke, remember what made Penn State successful in moving the ball downfield against Ohio State? It was really Aller's ability to extend plays. Rourke,
you're right.
I don't know that he has that element. They're going to have to be extra efficient and balanced to try to slow down that Ohio State pass rush. And I think Sawyer and JTT, you can talk about all the different levels of the Ohio State defense. Ultimately, those 2 guys are game changers at defensive end. And I think that might be the biggest advantage Ohio State has in this matchup of Indiana O versus Ohio State defense.
You're right. Like they played a good pass defense. Indiana did against Washington, but this is a totally different test for sure. It's going to be so much fun to see. 12 noon in the shoe. You want to give a pick now? You want to wait before we give some game picks a little bit later on?
No, I think we should do it right now.
All right. So, like you said, this is a big game here at the shoe. Let's just get the point spread up here really fast to make sure we're telling the people some right, accurate information. Ohio State in this game, 13.5-point favorites. You can check it out. Big noon kickoff here on Saturday. Tripp, who you got?
I really want to pick Indiana, especially with the McLaughlin injury up front. I think they cover 13.5-point spread, but I still think Ohio State has the most talent top to bottom in the country. They're at home. I love the resiliency and tenacity, just what they did to put together a couple of championship drives against Penn State. I think Ohio State's championship pedigree and experience in this moment ultimately is the difference. I think Ohio State wins a nail biter at the shoe.
You look at the McLaughlin injury. I think also what's important to note is the timing of it. It happened on Tuesday. So you don't have all week to game plan. You really only have 2 practices. Friday's basically a walkthrough for them. You have 2 practices really to kind of get your offensive line solidified. That to me is problematic. I like this Indiana rush defense. I think they can make Ohio State's offense one-dimensional. And I think Indiana can move the ball down the field or have some success. I think Indiana goes and wins. I think they go into the shoe. They win 24-20. The bye week 2 helps reset, refocus, have them come in fresh. Kurt Cignetti has showed you they are not afraid of the moment. They will come in and play anybody, anywhere. I love that attitude. They carry a chip on their shoulder. I think they're for real. I think they go into the shoe. They shock everybody, win outright, and shut everybody up. Stop the noise about who they've played, why they should be thrown out. They send a message. They are for real. Indiana wins. I think this is going to be a so great game.
I think it's going to be an unbelievable game. It's going to be an unbelievable game.
Before we get to the rest of Week 13 picks here, Tripp, I want to throw a few quick hitters by you here to kind of get set for the rest of the conference as we get ready for what is a big Week 13 in the Big Ten. First question I want to have for you here. USC going for bowl eligibility. Nebraska going again for bowl eligibility. Who do you think is more pressure on them to win on Saturday? Is it Lincoln Riley facing your crosstown rival, or is it Matt Rhule to finally break the 9-game losing streak of bowl eligibility and finally get a bowl win here or get bowl eligible for Nebraska?
I think it would be problematic to lose to UCLA for USC, but the narrative on the USC season has already been written. I think Matt Rule has more pressure to win this game because you cannot lose what would be your 10th in a row seeking bowl eligibility for Nebraska. It's a hurdle they have to get over. This is a winnable game for them. I think it's Matt Rule actually in this one.
I agree, in part because for USC, like if they go 5-7 or 6-6, it's a bad season either way, right? If you're Nebraska, there is a world of difference between going 5-7 and 6-6. I'm with you. They got to break through. They got to win this game here. And I do think I'm with you that Matt Rule, especially at home against a Wisconsin team, you got to win that game. And that's really, I think, your last chance here to kind of get bowl eligible, at least your best chance to get bowl eligible, I should say. I'm with you about Matt Rule. How about this? Who's more likely to get bowl eligible? 4-win UCLA have to run the table. They play USC, obviously, this week at home. They play Fresno State 5-5 next week. Or Wisconsin, who, as that 5 wins are 5-5, they play at Nebraska this week, then finish on the road at Minnesota. So 4-win UCLA, 5-win Wisconsin. Who do you think is more likely to become bowl eligible, those two?
I'm just going to go with Wisconsin because they only need to win one of the two.
I'm actually going to go UCLA. Well, I won't give away the game pick just yet, but I think their road is easier versus I just right now have no faith in this Wisconsin offense at all. And so to go on the road against a tough Nebraska team who is, I assume, is going to come out charged up, ready to take this opportunity. And then a Minnesota team who we've talked about is 5th, 6th best team in the Big Ten. That's going to be a really tough game for them as well. It's the state of Wisconsin right now. I will take UCLA to get 2 wins more than I trust Wisconsin right now to get 1. How about this? We got a little father-son rivalry here, Tripp.
Yeah.
Iowa, Maryland. Kirk Ferentz, right? Obviously, head coach of Iowa. Brian Ferentz is a senior offensive analyst for the Terps. Who needs to win more? Is it the father or the son here?
Man, I don't. Both. Yeah, there's not a whole lot. It's not been a good year for Iowa. They have quarterback injuries. Maryland's 1-6 in the Big Ten. Kirk Ferentz, because he's the head coach. That's my answer. He's not just an analyst.
Also, if you're Kirk, with how maligned your son has been to the Iowa community, even though, again, he has very little impact on this game, you can't lose to. It's just such a bad optic to lose to your son, who you had to essentially fire because of his poor performance. You can't lose to him. So I would say, get Kirk, more pressure. You got to beat your son here and get some family bragging rights. That's for sure. How about this, Tripp? Going forward, this is really not this year, but projecting ahead, which program would you rather be, let's say for the next 5 years? Would you rather be where Wisconsin is right now or Nebraska?
I think Nebraska at least knows which direction it's going. I think Wisconsin doesn't know who they are. I think they both have the right coach in place. But Nebraska, with the recruiting momentum, having a quarterback, Wisconsin does not have a quarterback.
Yep,
they're gonna have to get one out of the portal. But at least Nebraska knows. I think Dylan Raiola, even though he's hit a wall here in his freshman season, as long as they can salvage him, I think because of the coach quarterback tandem, the support they have, I think it's no question Nebraska.
I would agree, especially too, since when you look at Matt Rule, he's had a lot of success ever he's got, at least in college, right? He built up Temple to a 10-win team. Baylor, he took over, turned them around very quickly. I know that the turnaround's not been as fast, as Nebraska has been at Temple and Baylor, but he has proven he can win everywhere he goes. He can win at a high level. And like you said, there's actually direction. There's a rudder on that ship where Wisconsin right now, I mean, we were talking the last pod trip. Do they go back to the old offense? There's just so many questions, so many different avenues they can go to. The belief right now is not there with the program. I'm with you. I think I'd rather be Nebraska for the next 5 years. And last question I want to ask you here. Both teams have 5 wins. Which does bowl eligibility mean more this season for Wisconsin or Michigan?
Well, that's a great question. I think Michigan's gotten a free pass on their whole season. If they're in a bowl game or not, it's not what they expect. If you're playing in the, what the Big Ten bowl affiliations are. If you're playing in the Quick Lane Motor Bowl,
still around?
Yeah, I actually think it's Wisconsin to show that they could figure out. It would give them momentum at the end of the year. We already talked about they need just one more win. If they could get there with everything they've gone through, I think that would be a nice building block for them moving forward. For Michigan, it's who cares, start from scratch and try to be a playoff contender next year, regardless if you finish 7-5 or 5-7.
I would agree. I think it is Wisconsin, in part because the schedule is outlined before. That would mean you win one of the two at Nebraska, at Minnesota. That'd be a good momentum building win.
Mm-hmm.
And also, too, we talked about the direction of the program. You getting an extra maybe 2 weeks worth of bowl practices.
Yeah.
I would say Wisconsin, right, could use that more than Michigan. To where I'm with you. Like, people have written off Michigan. If they go 5-7, 6-6. It doesn't. It's like USC.
Yeah.
It does not matter. It's a lost season anyway. I think people expected that with the amount of loss they had. Maybe not to this point, but at this point, when you're sitting there with 5 wins, it's not going to be a referendum on Sherrone Moorless in year one. If you go 5-7 versus 6-6, I'm with you. I think there's a big difference here between Wisconsin and Michigan when it comes to bowl eligibility. All right, Tripp, let's get to some Week 13 picks here. Bowl eligibility still on the line. From Michigan State, they're 4-6. They do host 1-9 Purdue, looking for their first Big Ten win of the season. 8:00 Eastern, Friday night on Fox. I'm sure Fox thought they were going to get a good one here when they put this on the schedule. Do we see Purdue get a W in the win column in the Big Ten for the first time here, Tripp? By the way, Michigan State, I don't know if I said it, 13.5-point favorites.
Michigan State, not only do they host Purdue, then they host Rutgers to get to bowl eligibility. This is a real potential for them. When I Googled this game to try to get a little background on each team, the first result of Purdue versus Michigan State was the Purdue at Michigan State men's basketball game, which will take place in February. That tells you all you need to know. That's all you need to know about this matchup. Like it's going to be empty. Fox isn't getting good ratings for it. It's just kind of on there. I like Michigan State. I think they need to get off the field on defense. They've had some injuries there. Illinois was 8 for 15 on third downs against them. Michigan State, you put the nugget there. No sacks in their last 6 games. First time that's happened in Division I since 2005.
That's crazy.
Purdue, Michigan State, though, has a little bit more talent. I think it's close. I don't think they cover, but I think because they're at home, I like Michigan State. I think they're able to score points where Purdue probably doesn't have the ability to score the points that Michigan State does.
You outlined the misery that comes right now in Michigan State. They got off to a good start, too. They're 3-0. And all of a sudden, you believe in Jonathan Smith. They win a nice game at Maryland early in the year. And now they lost 6 out of the last 7. The bottom, it felt like they dropped out. That Illinois game, look, Illinois is a way better team, but it felt like lifeless. They weren't even like competing in that game. With that said, I mean, Purdue's just so bad. They are just so bad. I think Michigan
Can I add
State
one thing?
Sure.
Purdue's tight end Claire is a stud. That he will be the best player on the field. If Purdue can get him the ball somehow, some way, that guy's good. That is an NFL tight end. I was so impressed watching him last week.
He is really the only bright spot on that Boilermakers team.
They're bad.
Yeah, they are bad.
To their credit, they're bad.
So that said, even though Michigan State right now has their own problems and they can't get out of their own way, I think Sparty at home wins. I think they do cover here. Pretty ugly. I would say like maybe 27-10, 27-9. Get, really ugly, muck up the score here. Giving Michigan State at home to cover the 13.5-point spread on Friday night. Lock in, folks. Saturday, number 25 Illinois, Tripp on the road at Rutgers. Illinois cracks the rankings again at 7-3. They are 1-point favorites. Games at noon on Peacock. Make sure you subscribe to Peacock if you don't have it. If you're a Big Ten fan, I guess you have no choice. You had to.
This is actually a pretty good game.
I'm excited for it. What do you think?
Yeah, this is one of the better matchups in the Big Ten this week. Actually, one of the better matchups in the Big Ten this year. 2 teams with winning records, both about 500 in conference play. Here's the most interesting thing I found on this one. Rutgers has never won 3 straight Big Ten games since joining the league in 2014 and hasn't won a game against a ranked opponent in 15 years. Since November 12th, 2009, against 23rd ranked USF. Wow. I like Rutgers. They've got a little momentum here again. Momentum's a real thing. I like Rutgers at home.
I'm going to take Illinois on the road. I think Illinois' offense can match and exploit right now what is a weak Rutgers secondary. I think Luke Altmaier can have success throwing the ball through the air. Pat Bryant last week, career high 135 pass receiving yards, I should say, against Michigan State. I think you can carry that in this week, and they can have success against Rutgers' pass defense. That's crazy. I did not realize there's a lot of line from Rutgers here. Wow, 3 in a row, haven't been a home ranked opponent in 15. Jeez, like it's it's been bad. I don't know if it's been that bad, but sorry, Rutgers, no history for you this week. In part because, like, you look at that game against Maryland last week, Tripp, Rutgers won handle, like you look at the score, but Maryland moved the ball a ton. Now, the problem is they couldn't convert. They only punted one. They had 457 yards of total offense. Maryland did. They punted one time. They had big bugaboo 3 times. They were stopped on 4th down. So they had no problem moving the ball. Their problem is they couldn't punch it in. I think Illinois can punch it in. Give me the Illini here on the road, 27-20. They win a back and forth close game here against Rutgers because they are playing better and playing more competitive. But I do think Illinois gets it done on the road and stays ranked in the top 25. Speaking of Maryland here, Tripp, Iowa, they are hosting Iowa 6-4. The Hawkeyes do come in here. They have more quarterback issues as Brendan Sullivan, who did give them a nice shot in the arm here of life on offense, he's likely now out for the rest of the season. It looks like, nothing official, but it looks like Iowa right now is going to start Jackson Stratton and have Cade McNamara be the backup. So another quarterback now for Iowa starting. Does this mean they get a win on the road here against Maryland, Tripp? Or Maryland, they're holding on to bowl eligibility here. They're 4-6. Can they give themselves some life? 12 o'clock Eastern on BTN.
Ever since the start of October, Iowa 0-3 in road games. Lost at Ohio State, obviously. Lost at Michigan State. And lost at UCLA. I like Maryland at home.
I like Iowa here. I think Iowa's going to pull it out. I think it's going to be an ugly game in part because I think what they do.
You don't even need to give any justification. Yeah.
All I'll say is,
how you can justify either team winning.
I like Billy Edwards. I try to hype up this passing attack maybe more than I should. But Billy Edwards, for all the passing yards he accumulates and touchdowns, boy, does he throw a lot of picks. And that is music to the Iowa secondary ears. I think Iowa wins close here, 2017. They win on the road here and do squeak by the Terps. A game you'll be at, Tripp, Penn State, 4th in the country, going on the road to Minnesota. Minnesota 6-4 on the air, 3:30 Eastern on CBS. What are you looking at in this game? What are you kind of keeping your eye on?
Minnesota coming off a bye after a surprising loss at Rutgers, was the hottest team, one of the hotter teams in the Big Ten. That's not among the top 4 teams in the league. Penn State's 12.5-point favorites. This is going to be a game. This is going to be a game. Minnesota's got a very stingy defense. They've got a good back in Darius Taylor. And the thing with Taylor is he's dangerous in both the running game, and this year they've really unlocked him. He's their second leading receiver in the passing game as well. I think for Penn State to have success, they need to continue to run the ball well. They ran for more than 200 yards in each of the last 2 games. Obviously, that's come from a quartet, if not more, of players in Tyler Warren, who's been unstoppable in short yardage situations. Drew Aller, who's used his legs well. I think Penn State really needs to unlock Nicholas Singleton yet. And I think he's healthy now. I view him as, if they can get Singleton going offensively, the way they have Warren going offensively, everyone's talking about those Penn State wide receivers. To me, the next element of their offense now is if you can get Singleton going, where you have to worry about where 10 is at the same time as 44, they're as dangerous as anyone. I like Penn State on the road here. I think their defense is good. I think they'll be able to get pressure on Minnesota. They've shown the last couple of weeks what they did against Walker, what they did against Coleman in the games against Wisconsin and against Washington. They can slow down a good back and then really put the pressure on Brosmer from Minnesota. I like Penn State, but certainly Minnesota, if they do things well, and if they create turnovers like they have at an unreal clip this year, 16 picks, leads the Big Ten, it's 10th in the country, you can't go in here and sleepwalk. Minnesota's a good football team, and you can certainly see ways that, okay, how could this go haywire for a number 4 team that really should be on cruise control to a college football playoff? This is a good Minnesota team, especially playing them on the road at that place at 3:30. Minnesota has a history of upsetting Penn State in big games too. Obviously in 2019, back in 1999, there's a little history there. I like Penn State. I think they're playing well. I think they're really good. But obviously there are some, going into the last week matchup against Purdue, I'm like, I don't even know what I tell you. But this week I can point to a lot of different elements of what Minnesota does well. And I think this is a better Minnesota team than we saw in Piscataway a couple weeks ago.
This is a game that I had circled for a while, like you. Like, this is one of those kind of like, you kind of maybe don't look at it in July as a tough game. This is one where really once the season started, like, oh boy, this is going to be one of those challenging kind of games, in part because Minnesota's pass defense is really good. They're 17th in the country, like you mentioned, first in the Big Ten with 16 interceptions. They are ball hawks. Coy Parrish is unbelievable as a true freshman. He's great. Oh, man, he's going to be great in that secondary. Maybe another Antoine Winfield Jr. for the Golden Gophers there.
If you can keep him.
That's welcome to the world of college football here. You're right about that. It's a good point. But what is it like? I guess what gives me encouragement with Penn State is the fact that you faced a really good Washington pass defense a few weeks ago, and Drew Aller was sharp and efficient and decisive. 20 of 28 in that game. He passed for 240 yards and 3 touchdowns and not turn the ball over. He made some plays. He knew where to go with the football. He had some receivers step up and look a lot better than they did the week prior against Ohio State. You mentioned Nick Singleton. I'm looking at the receivers here. I know maybe it's just beating a dead horse, and maybe I'm just banging my head against the wall, and it's just the definition of insanity. But like, if you have any chance of making a deep run in the playoff, I agree with Singleton. He has to be a bigger factor. You also need to have guys on the outside make plays. You need Trey Wallace to step up. You need Amari Evans to make some plays here. And what was concerning last week against Purdue in a blowout win was the fact you had receivers have 3 catches, Tripp, for a grand total of 56 yards. Purdue's one of the worst pass defenses in all of college football. And you could not get your receivers going more than that. I mean, you said it on Monday. Well, what did James Franklin tell you at halftime of that game?
Need to get some receivers some touches.
Tyler Warren's great, but we got to get our receivers going. Couldn't do it.
I think it's a shame, too, because I think Drew Aller is playing at an elite level for Penn State. His ability to make progressions, climb the pocket, always keep his eyes downfield, the way he throws, he's made some unreal throws, tight windows. I think their deficiency at that position right now is overshadowing what has been, or even handcuffing what has been. I think Drew Aller has played as well as any quarterback in the country. I think he looks like every bit of an NFL quarterback. He's the real deal. His numbers may not be there just because they're so balanced, and Warren obviously has been such a big part of it for them offensively. But Aller's kind of the most underrated player in the country to me, the way he's played this year. But obviously the receivers have a lot to do with it.
Especially when you look at the quarterback draft conversation, no one's talking about Drew Aller. And I agree with you. I think he could be a really successful pro, in part because he does everything right. It's just not popping off the stat sheet and popping off the highlights, in part because the receivers are not getting open and making plays and catching the ball consistently. So with all that said, I agree with you about Aller. I agree about Nick Singleton here. I think Penn State does win. I think they do cover the 12.5 spread. I think it is a close game for 3.5 quarters. I think Penn State eventually does pull away and wins 34-20. But I think we're going to see a really tight back and forth game here for about 3.5 quarters. And I think at the end, Penn State could pull away, but it's going to be a tough one. That crowd's going to be good. It's going to be some interesting weather. I mean, we've really not had Big Ten weather, Trip. Really at any point this season.
I will have my parka. Yeah, I'll have my parka packed. It does look like sun and 36 as the high. So
when you said 6, I was going to say 60.
No.
36.
Sun and 36.
2:30 local kick, so it's going to be dark by what,
chilly.
halftime?
A little after, but yeah, it'll be.
Are you going to be straddled up against the heater?
Heaters are useful. Heated benches. You try to find those spots, but I'll have my parka on.
Okay. Hat, gloves, I'm assuming as well. Scarf?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Absolutely.
He'll be ready to go. Ready to
for the elements. Right. Won't complain at all.
Yeah, I'm sure Monday's pod will definitely start with the games and not how cold you were on the sideline. I'm sure about that. Speaking of cold here, Michigan, pretty chilly this time of year. They're hosting Northwestern. Northwestern comes in 4-6. Michigan 5-5, looking to become bowl eligible. 3:30 Eastern on Fox Sports 1. Wolverines 10.5-point favorites. Tripp, can Michigan get bowl eligible?
Yeah, I like Michigan.
Period. Stop. I agree. I like Michigan. One thing I'm watching, though, for them, they've had some red zone issues this year, and that was highlighted by Indiana. I mean, they could have beaten Indiana the last time they played a few weeks ago, in part because they settled for field goals instead of touchdowns. They made it inside the Indiana 10-yard line 3 separate times, resulted in just 1 touchdown. Now, look, I don't think Northwestern's going to be able to move the ball a ton against Michigan's defense. So I do like Michigan to win here and cover. But it is something to kind of watch, not only the rest of this year, but even going forward here. Michigan has to become more efficient in the red zone. I think it also gets better as you get better quarterback play, which, I mean, we can assume, right, will improve at some point this offseason. So, yeah, I like Michigan here to win and cover. They get bowl eligible, go to 6-5 in the season. 2 more here. A lot. I actually overlooked 1 game. Wisconsin at Nebraska. Both teams come in at 5-5. Trip. Both teams desperate to become bowl eligible. At home, Cornhuskers 2.5-point favorites. 3:30 Eastern on BTN. Who becomes bowl eligible?
I think Wisconsin's defense is the better of the two defenses in this game. The defense travels. I think Nebraska has made a lot of losing football plays with their turnovers, their inconsistency, what they have going on the offensive side. I know Wisconsin has major, major issues offensively, especially at the quarterback position. Obviously made the change with Phil Longo out that we talked about on the podcast on Monday. I still like Wisconsin in this game to go on the road. I think Nebraska, I think they're spiraling, and I don't think there's a way to stop the spiral.
I think Nebraska does stop the spiral, in part because even with the firing of Phil Longo, I have no idea I have nothing. Actually, I know what to expect. Nothing from Wisconsin's offense. You know what was a weird trip this week?
Tawee Walker. They have to ride Tawee Walker.
Yeah. Well, yes, I agree. You can't have Braden Locke throw the ball. I agree.
Can he run against a good Nebraska run defense?
It's going to be a big challenge. What was interesting, too, is Luke Fickell this week was asked, obviously, since you fired Phil Longo, who's going to be calling the plays? He didn't say. He said, it doesn't matter. It's going to be one giant collaboration. So, I mean, we'll have an idea, as you'll see someone talking to the headset on Saturday, of who is actually calling the plays. But Luke Fickell, very coy about who will actually be now the true play caller for Wisconsin. I just don't know what their identity is. I don't trust their offense. I think it's going to be a sloppy game. Lower scoring, 17-13, 20-17. I think Nebraska, though, does break through. They finally stopped the losing streak at 9 games in a row they've lost when it comes to being bowl eligible. They get the bowl, release the balloons trip. Finally happened for the first time since 2016. Nebraska will be playing some postseason football. Congratulations. Finally, nice little LA interstate rivalry. Late night here, NBC, 10:30 p.m. Eastern. So
hold on.
Big Ten after dark.
Hold on. You said interstate?
Oh, here we go.
Intrastate. Inter would mean crossing state lines.
You know, it was a test. I was testing to see how wise you were now at 36, and you passed the test. Good job. Good job for you. Crosstown rivalry. USC making that long trip to the Rose Bowl here as they look to become bowl eligible. UCLA 4-6 still have dreams of making a bowl as well here. Big Ten after dark. USC comes in 4.5-point favorites after getting a shot in the arm last week from Jada Mayava. Who wins, Tripp?
What is a further drive, from Westwood to the Rose Bowl or from the Coliseum and USC's campus to the Rose Bowl?
It's a good question. I don't. With LA traffic, both?
I'm trying to punch it into Google Maps. We'll have an answer for you on Monday's podcast. I like USC. I think with Mayava at quarterback, I think they found something last week. They actually ran the football. If they run the ball with Marks again 25 times and let Mayava do his thing, I like USC. They're the better team. They're the more talented team, and I think they got the spark. I think they kind of turned their season around last week a little bit, and I think they carry that throughout the end of the year. And not only do I think they win this weekend, I think with not having to leave the state at the end of the year, I think they give Notre Dame all they can handle next weekend, too.
Ooh, okay. A little tease for what we can expect next week, picks-wise from Tripp. I mean, you're right about USC being the better team. That's in this rivalry, at least recently, it's not matter. Like, USC is 3-3 the last 6 games against UCLA. I would probably argue maybe all but one, maybe all 6 games, they were the more talented team. But UCLA has had their number of late. But with what you said, I agree with. They ran the ball really well against Nebraska, a really good run defense in Nebraska last week. And finally, Lincoln Riley has discovered maybe running the ball more than 20 times a game is actually going to work for the offense. Mayava provided, I think, a real spark that is tangible now, not just for 1 week, but can be sustained throughout the rest of the season. I think USC wins. They do cover the 4.5-point spread. 27. I think they win by 2 scores here, 27-14. I think they can go into the Rose Bowl here and what will probably be a home game for them and win that game. Is that it? To wrap up, that is it. Well, I need some, I don't say advice here, but I could be in big trouble come Monday's pod. I have a wedding on Saturday. By the way, please, no fall weddings. What are you doing? But this is now a wedding that is Lauren's friend's wedding, the first wedding that we have together, where it's not one of my friends' wedding, but one of her friends' wedding. I feel like kind of the rules sometimes go out the window when you're now like the extra versus like the, this is my friend group. The reception is at 2:00.
No way. Wait, why?
Oh, no, so I'm not the reception. Sorry, the ceremony. My apologies, which I think is worse. The ceremony's at 2:00.
No,
look, the phone's coming. I said I could be in trouble. The phone's coming out. There's no way I'm missing Indiana, Ohio State, and bride and groom could be walking down the aisle. 2 minutes to go. Sorry, not paying attention.
You're not going to be the only one there doing that.
You're probably right. I don't know what the crowd, again, I don't know what the crowd is. I know some of our friends, not a lot of them. That's what I'm worried about here. I could be the odd man out. I could be one of the few people actually caring about what's going on a Saturday. I could be doing the show Trip from outside on Monday. It could be a rough.
Is it at a church? Is it at a church?
Yes.
That's good. There's places to hide your phone as opposed to if you're sitting on just regular chairs. So you're good.
Right. And I think it should be a big wedding. So hopefully, a lot of people there. You can kind of blend out, sit in the middle of the aisle.
Yeah.
I'm debating. Do I bring AirPods? I can't go there.
No,
I
don't think you can do AirPods. That's bad. No, you can't do AirPods.
Sit one ear over though.
You got to get
listen
one of
what Gus and Joel have to say.
Yeah. Might be better not to listen. You're good. Watch on your phone. You're fine. You knocked your AirPods.
So at least AirPods falling out. Now this is just a disaster. This is a fair way, I think, to end the podcast right now. So
this is great.
Tripp,
this is fun.
Happy birthday. What do we do?
Thanks.
Last thing. What do we do for the birthday? Big 36.
We're having friends over tonight at my place.
Okay. You making anything?
Kind of like a Friendsgiving birthday combo. Yeah, I need you to stop talking so I can go to the grocery store.
Yeah, okay. He brings up his birthday voluntarily. Now I'm the bad guy for bringing it up. Now I just want to talk about it. So on that note, we'll end the pod so Tripp can get shopping. We'll hear about, I'm sure it will be a disaster in the kitchen. No disrespect. You don't look like the cooking type to me. So maybe we'll hear about how the Friendsgiving does go on Thursday. Enjoy the games. Enjoy the weekend. We'll talk to you on Monday right here on the Still Enrolled podcast.